Hello again, football fans. This is Anthony coming at you with Two Fat Guys Fantasy Football. Uh, Today we're continuing our series of off-season breakdowns. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. As always, let's jump right into it and see what this roster looked like at the end of last year. Uh, so last year, this was a roster that, going into the season, many expected to be competitive for the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. Tom Brady came back for one more season after teasing retirement and had a good year statistically, but not the year that I think he expected to have as in terms of a success from a success standpoint. Um, Tom Brady, the greatest to ever do it at the quarterback position. I think all of us can agree on that. But unfortunately, he wasn't enough to push this team over the edge. They had a few other deficiencies that let him down. The running game was one of those. Leonard Fournette was back. Unfortunately, he didn't have the same form that he had in the previous year in the Super Bowl run. So unfortunately, he was a guy that uh, didn't produce the way I think the team expected him to. The team did draft Rashad White, uh, who was a rookie running back that I like quite a bit. He's a guy that moving into his second year, if the Buccaneers don't add another running back to the room, he's a guy that I think could be in line for a heavy workload and be a guy that might be a target for you in the middle rounds of your fantasy drafts. The wide receiver room was incredibly loaded, but dealt with some injuries through the year. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are the two headliners here. Julio Jones, at the twilight of his career, was brought in um, and just kind of never really had the impact that I think they were expecting him to have. They also signed Russell Gage to come in to originally be that third receiver. Russell Gage is a guy I do like quite a bit as kind of the third receiver here. He's got a lot of nice skills. He's a good overall receiver. Not a real true deep threat, but a guy that can do a lot of things for you on the field. He mixes well with the rest of the guys, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. They did have a true speed threat in Scotty Miller and Brashard Perriman, a couple guys kind of at the bottom of the wide receiver room that actually, for Perriman especially, just kind of he really had an impact for them a couple years ago, and it just never worked out again this year. So a receiver room that's loaded, but kind of underperformed as a total unit. The tight end room, Cade Otton emerged as the lead target here as a rookie out of Washington. Overtook that role from, uh, goodness, uh, from Cameron Brate. Cameron Brate was kind of expected to be the starter. They also brought in Kyle Rudolph to that room, so it was a very veteran room, but Cade Otton emerged to be the guy down the stretch. He proved to just have the better connection with Tom Brady, and I think they did find a good answer for that tight end position moving forward in Cameron Otton. The offensive line, stacked with talent. Ryan Jensen is one of the best centers in the NFL. He is the anchor. He is a true workhorse and a guy that is very, very good. He's going to be double-digit veteran now. He's been around for a long time, but is still playing at an extremely high level. The right tackle is one of the best young tackles in the NFL, and Tristan Wirfs. Tristan Wirfs is a guy that can do it all. He's still getting better. The sky is really the limit for him. A real cornerstone piece that they can build around moving forward. I like him a lot. On the left tackle spot was Donovan Smith, the long tenured veteran there. Donovan Smith was terrible for them last year. He was a big reason for the team's lack of success. He just didn't perform the way that we had been accustomed to seeing Donovan Smith perform. He was almost a turnstile on the left side. So left tackle is a position that needed to be addressed. The left side of the line is whole. Um, Nick Leverett is the guy that just hasn't developed. He's not a real answer at that position. They don't really have that answer. Um, Shaq Mason was brought in as at the right guard, longtime teammate of Tom Brady, so a guy that he was familiar with and he was comfortable with. But unfortunately, he didn't have, I think, the impact that the team was expecting him to have as well. So the offense, while it looks great, unfortunately, kind of underperformed in a lot of ways last year. Wasn't enough to carry the load. The defense on the other side of the ball here was stacked with veterans, but also has quite a bit of youth and speed as well. It's a team that the defense really is kind of the strength of this team. On the D line, they brought in longtime Bears veteran Akeem Hicks uh, to be that end. He dealt with a lot of injuries through the year, didn't really have the impact that they expected him to have as a free agent signing. The nose tackle is Vita Vea, one of the best around. Um, been around for quite a while now. I think he's going to be in his sixth year, but he's a guy that is arguably one of the best nose tackles, if not the best nose tackle in the league for 3-4. He's very, very stout at the point of attack. You always have to account for him. You almost always have to double team him. So he does exactly what you want him to do out of the nose tackle position. On the right end spot, William Golston, journeyman veteran, completely adequate. Also have Logan Hall here at that spot, kind of a rotational guy. So the front three on paper looked great. In essence, it ended up being Vita Vea trying to carry the load there. The linebackers are a great group. Shaq Barrett has proven to be a good pass rusher in this league. Joe Tryon Shoyinka, drafted a couple years ago, is a guy that continues to get better. Showed some signs as a rookie and some flashes as a rookie of what he could be. Last year, he improved off of that even a little bit more. If he can continue to develop in the Todd Bowles scheme here, I think they could have a budding star on their hands at the outside linebacker spot. In the middle, it's manned by both Levante David and Devin White. Levante David, you can't really say enough good things about him. He is um, a true what you want out of a middle linebacker in the NFL. He's also incredibly loyal to the team. Has taken some team friendly deals to stay with the team and kind of be there for his entire career. So he's a guy that you have to like to cheer for. He's just all around one of the best middle linebackers around. He does just about everything well. Next to him was Devin White. Devin White, uh, drafted a few years ago out of LSU, and probably the fastest middle linebacker around. He is a true sideline to sideline guy. Makes a lot of tackles, doesn't miss a lot of plays. He's great in coverage. He's not as much of a pass rusher as you want. He's not a super big hitter. He's not going to force a ton of fumbles, but he's a guy that's always around the ball, always making plays for you. A guy that you really want to have around. So definitely a good middle linebacker, making this one of the stronger linebacker cores in the NFL. At the safety spot, they had Keanu Neal, Edwards, and Logan Ryans. So they have safeties galore. Antoine Winfield is the kind of the guy to talk about. He's a young guy, comes from a great pedigree, and he is an emerging star. He is kind of takes after everything you kind of see about Minka Fitzpatrick's kind of game, and he's just kind of a younger, slightly smaller version of that. So maybe a bit undersized for what you want, but he can truly do it all out of the free safety spot and is another young guy that they can build around on the defensive side of the ball. Their cornerback room last year was led by Jamel Dean, Carlton Davis, Sean Murphy Bunting. They did draft Zion McCollum out of Sam Houston, and he is a guy that I am keeping my eyes on. He has ideal size for the position and length, 6'2", 200 pounds, great speed. He's a little raw in coverage. That was the knock on him coming out, but ultra explosive. He's a great athlete. he's a guy that if he can develop those coverage skills a little bit more, he's a guy that could absolutely step in and be a star at the cornerback position. Um, Jamel Dean is a guy that really performs well, gets a lot of unnecessary heat from a lot of the fans around Tampa Bay for the few plays that he does miss, but he's a guy that I like quite a bit. This is a quarterback room and a defense as a whole that is a championship caliber defense. This is why they felt like they could come back and compete for sure. This is a championship level roster on paper. But unfortunately, like I said, it didn't work out for them and ended up not meeting the expectations they had for themselves. So let's take a look now at what has happened to this roster as the offseason has continued. First and foremost, we'll notice that the biggest thing is that Tom Brady is no longer on the squad, which leaves a big hole to fill at the quarterback position. Nobody's going to come in and replace Tom Brady, but the man who's going to try is Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield last year bounced around quite a bit, had a good little run of success at the end there of the season with the Rams, and kind of earned himself a new deal and a new chance. So I'm interested to see what he can do in this offense. Um, it's still an offense that's loaded with weapons. So he's got as much a chance to succeed as any. Rashad White, like I said, is a running back that I do uh, have some high hopes for if they don't address the position in the draft with uh, third round, fourth round draft capital. The draft is incredibly deep at running back, so there are a lot of guys in that tier that could come in and push him quite a bit. They did add Chase Edmonds in free agency. Chase Edmonds is a nice back as well. Um, he's a good complement to what Rashad White is. I don't think that he's necessarily going to push Rashad White. I think he's more of a change of pace, kind of a breather kind of a guy based off of what we've seen from him. I kind of hope he puts it all together because I think he's got a unique set of skills, but it hasn't happened yet. So at the receiver core, it's led, of course, by the perennial superstar Mike Evans. Um, you can't say enough good things about him. He's a monster in size, 6'5", 230, great speed, good hands, does kind of everything well. Great jump ball guy. He's a great possession guy, but he can also be a deep threat. He really is a guy that any team would love to have. Um, so he's also a willing blocker out there as well to hit in the run game. Chris Godwin is another guy that I like a lot as I target in fantasy drafts. He's a guy that always seems to be perennially underrated, uh, similar in that kind of Terry McLaurin range. Two guys that you can get a little bit later and can give you wide receiver one production. Godwin's another guy that kind of can do everything well. Um, he's not as big as Mike Evans, but he has a lot of the same skills and, like I said, can do almost everything almost just as well. So as a one-two punch, they are arguably the best one-two punch at receiver in the NFC. I know you could say AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. I mean, there's a lot of good combos. For my money, this is probably the best though. Russell Gage, like I said, last year was brought in on a free agent deal to be that third receiver, and I think he complements the other two very well. It's from one, two, three. Uh, he does make this one of the top receiving cores in the NFL. Outside of that, though, they let everybody else kind of go. So wide receiver is a position that they could address later in the draft. And again, we'll see what's left. There's a lot of guys down in that third, fourth, fifth round range that are guys, but could be productive in the right situations. The biggest issue for this team moving forward is going to be the offensive line. Shaq Lawson, or uh, yeah, Shaq was let go, traded away to the Houston Texans. Neil Everett still is not the answer. And right now, they really don't have an answer at left tackle. Luke Goedeke is penciled in to be the starting left tackle, and he is not equipped for that role. So offensive line is definitely a position of need for them. They could go a lot of ways with that in the draft, and I fully expect them to. On defense, the defense is a little bit different, but not necessarily a ton different. Vita Vea still leads that the front seven. They did let Akeem Hicks go, but they did bring in Greg Gaines. Greg Gaines is going to be a guy that kind of can step in and do a lot of those things that Akeem Hicks was supposed to do. So I think he helps out this D line a little bit. And Sanaa uh, is a kind of a journeyman veteran, but he is adequate enough for what the rest of the defense to fill that role. So not necessarily a position of need, but something that they might address as the drift goes on. Linebacker core remains intact. Levante David signed a deal to come back one more year, so everything here is the same. Antoine Winfield still leads the safety, but they did let the rest of the safeties go and brought in Ryan Neal to fill that strong safety role, who is going to do fine. He complements a lot of what Antoine Winfield does very well. So the back end is in good shape. At the cornerback position, Jamel Dean was brought back. He's a free agent that I fully expected to not re-sign with his current team, but they were able to convince him to come back. Carlton Davis is the second corner, very young corner group, but still a very solid 1-2 corner. With the departure of a couple of the other guys, the third corner is going to be expected to be Zion McCollum at this point. So I am very interested to see how he can develop in his second year. So all in all, you have to say that on paper and just kind of in in general, this is a roster that is not nearly as strong as it was at the beginning of the offseason, but some hard decisions had to be made. And Tom Brady does still have kind of an impact on their uh, salary cap. So they had to make some tough decisions. And this is a team that can still be competitive in the NFC South, but we do have some holes that we need to fill, primarily along the offensive line. Um, if we can get the offensive line shored up, I think the offense has a chance to keep them competitive. They can score some points, um, but the defense is what's going to be relied upon to keep them in games. So let's skip ahead here and take a look at the draft and see what are some things that they might be looking to do in the middle of the first round here with their pick. So um, picking right around 20. So offensive line, I mean, that has to be where we're looking. Um, Skoronsky and Paris Johnson are both going to be gone. Osiris Torrance might be a guy that's still there. We've talked about him quite a bit. This could be a spot where you take a Whippler or a Titman, a guys that could be um, capable of sliding around the interior of the O line. You could look at maybe trading back and looking at a guy like Andrew Voorhees, um, or you could be looking at a guy like Anton Harrison. Um, Broderick Jones is a guy that could play some left tackle if he's still on the board. In the second round, guys like DeJuan Jones, Cody Mosh could be guys that you would look at as well. But I think that's where we're really going to be looking in the draft is for an offensive lineman that can plug in and play. If the value is not there, we could look to address that D line with a guy like Miles Murphy, Brian Breesy, if he's there. These are two guys that could step in and help out. Um, while not a perfect fit, Kalijah Cansey is another name that could step in and help out there. Linebacker is absolutely not a spot that I would look to address in the first round if I was them. Quarterback is a possibility if that's where the value is. Um, I fully expect, like I said, the top three guys to be gone at this point, but Deontay Banks is a guy that could come in and be very competitive. Safety, I don't think is a value here either for them for what they need. Really, I think we're probably going to see um, we're probably going to see the Buccaneers attack tackle quite a bit. Probably, if it was me, I'd probably look at doing it with uh, the first two picks. Honestly, and say there's enough offensive line depth there that we could really make some inroads in strengthening that line. Skoronsky is a name that if he slides a little bit, if teams see him as a guard more than a tackle, he could get pushed down. But I think he has all the makings to be an all-pro caliber guard in the league. So if he slides down, he's absolutely a name that we could look at. Um, Osiris Torrance is another name. Plug and play guard immediately strengthens that O line quite a bit. Helps out a spot that was a struggle for them last year, that left side of that line. Um, the centers, so Whippler and Tippmann, um, are more likely to be able to be moved around along the interior. So these are a couple guys that you might look at as well. Uh, Schmitz is a guy that is kind of a pure center. Not a guy that I would think you would look at playing guard. And with Jensen there, I don't necessarily see the value for him. On the right side, Voorhees is probably the name that I'm looking at the most. Um, he's a guy that can give you some versatility there along the guard spot, but definitely addresses a position of need. Might be able to trade back a little bit and still pick him up. And then the biggest name, if he's available, would be Broderick Jones. Broderick Jones is the name that um, I think this would pivot around. Um, if he's available, if it starts to get close and he's available, the Bucks might look to move up just to make sure that they get him. If they could book in Broderick Jones on the left side of the line with Tristan Wirfs on the right side, that would give them a vast improvement over where they were last year. So in the second round, I mean, Dewan Jones, Cody Mosh would both be interesting names as well. In the guard spot, like I said, maybe Brocker Voorhees, um, Steve Avila, who we talked about in a previous video, is another name if we're looking in the second round that could be available early day two. And then we've got Matthew Bergeron in the second round. Is a guy we haven't really talked about too much out of Syracuse. He's a guy who is inconsistent on tape, but he shows the good is very good, but the bad is kind of bad. So he's a guy that might need some seasoning a little bit, but he is a guy that you could look to develop. But honestly, I think he's an improvement as a plug and play tackle over what is currently on the roster. I think he's immediately better than what's currently there. Um, he's a guy that I do like, just not as much as some of the other names. So he's a guy that, like I said, if it's me and I'm the Buccaneers GM for the weekend, I'm probably going O line with two of my first three picks, um, just because of how weak it is for the team. And if they can't give Baker any time, it doesn't matter who the receivers are. They're not going to have a chance to make plays because he's going to be running for his life. So this is a team that has taken a step back. It's a team that I think the organization still believes can contend, especially in the NFC South, and I think they're right about that. Addressing the offensive line has to be a priority for them. They could also look to do it after the draft with some veteran cuts, depending on how the draft falls. Kind of that third and fourth wave of free agency as we start to get into it. But it is absolutely an area that needs to be addressed. On defense, I don't necessarily think they have to address defense at all. They will because they're a relatively well-run organization, and you draft to fill future holes, not just current holes. So we'll see a couple of defensive picks for them as well. But all in all, it's a roster that is not as good on paper as it was last year, but can still be competitive. But that's going to do it for me today. As always, we will continue this series and we will get through every single team breakdown before the start of the NFL draft. After the draft and after things shake out a little bit, we will revisit uh, each of these teams and take a look at what they did during the draft and start taking a look at some fantasy outlooks for the teams moving forward. As always, feedback and comments are encouraged and very much appreciated. I love interacting with people. If I missed a guy, if there's something that you think that they are going to do that I didn't address, or a guy that you like a lot and want me to talk about more, let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to address that moving forward. Um, but as I said, that's going to do it for me. We will talk to you next time.